A single-day ticket to Magic Kingdom now costs more than most people's weekly grocery bill. And that's before you've bought a hotel room, a churro, or a single souvenir mouse ear. Families who grew up going every year are quietly crossing it off the list. So today we're looking at why nobody can afford visiting Disney World anymore. From $3.50 to over $200. When Walt Disney World opened on October 1st, 1971, a one-day general admission ticket to Magic Kingdom cost $3.50. Adjusted for inflation, that's somewhere between $21 and $28 in today's money, depending on which calculator you use. Rides weren't even included in that price back then. Guests bought individual attraction tickets or a booklet of coupons on top of admission, with the most popular e-ticket rides running up to 90 cents extra. Compare that to 2026, where a single-day ticket to Magic Kingdom on the most expensive dates of the year has crossed $200 for the first time in the park's history, reaching as high as $209 per person before tax. Even on the cheapest possible day at the cheapest park, Animal Kingdom, tickets start at $119. Do the actual math on that gap, and admission prices at Walt Disney World have climbed somewhere around 2,900% since 1971, while general inflation over that same stretch increased by roughly 392%. Disney World has raised its ticket prices more than 40 separate times since opening day, and the pace hasn't slowed down in recent years. If anything, it's accelerated. For a little historical texture, that 1971 admission price bought you access to a park with exactly one theme park to visit, Magic Kingdom. Since Epcot, Hollywood Studios, and Animal Kingdom didn't exist yet, there was no Lightning Lane, no dining plan, no resort loyalty tiers, none of the modern add-on ecosystem that now makes up such a large share of the total bill. It was, by design, a simpler product. Pay to get in, then pay a little more per ride if you wanted the good ones. Modern Disney World, by contrast, sells 4 separate theme parks, 2 water parks, dozens of resort hotels across multiple price tiers, and an entire secondary economy of optional paid upgrades layered on top of the base ticket, which is part of why comparing $1971 to $2026 only tells part of the story. The product genuinely got bigger. It just got considerably more expensive at a rate that outpaced its own growth. The line-skipping tax nobody signed up for. Ticket prices alone don't tell the whole story because Disney restructured how guests actually experience the parks starting in 2021. FastPass, the free system that let guests reserve ride times in advance, was replaced by Disney Genie Plus, a paid service originally priced at $15 per person per day just to get expedited access to a rotating list of attractions. That $15 starting price didn't stay simple for long. In October 2022, Disney introduced surge pricing, meaning the cost of Genie Plus could climb higher on busier days depending on demand, the same dynamic pricing logic airlines and concert venues use. By June 2023, pricing split further by park. Then in July 2024, Genie Plus was rebranded entirely as Lightning Lane Multi-Pass, with a separate Lightning Lane Single Pass, replacing the old a la carte system for the most popular individual attractions, things like Star Wars, Rise of the Resistance, and Guardians of the Galaxy, Cosmic Rewind, which weren't included in the bundle at all. On top of Multi-Pass, Disney also rolled out a Lightning Lane Premier Pass, priced at nearly $500 per person, which grants unlimited access to Lightning Lane attractions for a single day. For a family of 4, that's an additional $2,000 on a single day, just to avoid standing in the regular line. By 2026, the ceiling on Lightning Lane multi-pass pricing had climbed as high as $45 per person, per day at Magic Kingdom on the busiest dates, more than triple the service's original $15 starting price from just a few years earlier. That's before accounting for the fact that multi-pass access is now sold separately per park, meaning a family that wants to park hop between Magic Kingdom and Epcot in the same day, something a standard park hopper ticket has always allowed for free, may need to purchase Lightning Lane access twice to get the same line-skipping benefit at both parks. The pricing has grown genuinely difficult for an average guest to predict in advance, since it fluctuates by date, by park, and even by how close to the actual visit date you're checking. The exact kind of opaque, ever-shifting system that makes it nearly impossible to budget for accurately months ahead of a trip. None of this is technically mandatory. You can still wait in the standard standby line for free, exactly like guests always could. But Disney has spent years building an entire pricing structure around that specific psychological pressure point. The fact that most people, staring down a 2-hour wait for Space Mountain on the one vacation day they've got, will eventually pull out their wallet rather than lose the afternoon to a queue. Parking, annual passes, and the death of free? It's worth pointing out just how many things that used to be simply included in the cost of a ticket have quietly become their own separate line item. Standard parking at any Walt Disney World theme park now runs $35 per vehicle, up from $30 just a year earlier. Want a spot closer to the entrance instead of a long tram ride away? Preferred parking runs between $50 and $60 a day, depending on the season. Oversized vehicles, RVs, and larger vans pay $40 flat. To be fair, parking remains free for guests staying at a Disney Resort hotel and for select annual pass holders. But that's exactly the kind of asterisk that pushes families toward booking the more expensive on-site hotel option in the first place, rather than saving money with an off-site stay and eating the daily parking charge instead. Annual passes, long considered one of the smarter long-term values for families who visit multiple times a year, have climbed right alongside everything else. Depending on the tier, Walt Disney World annual passes now range from roughly $489 up to $1,629 before tax. That upper tier used to represent genuine savings for a family visiting 5 or 6 times a year. At today's per-visit ticket prices, the math still technically works out in the pass's favor for frequent visitors, but the sheer size of that upfront number, over $1,600 before a single family member has set foot in a park, prices out a huge swath of exactly the kind of loyal, repeat visiting local family that annual passes were originally designed to reward. What a trip actually costs in 2026. Let's build out an honest total, because individual line items always sound more manageable than the number they add up to. Inside the Magic reported that the total cost of a typical Walt Disney World vacation climbed by roughly 15% in 2026 compared to just a year or two earlier, driven not by one dramatic price hike, but by several smaller ones landing all at once across tickets, hotels, Lightning Lane, and food. Start with the hotel. Value resorts like Disney's Pop Century and the All-Star Resorts are still marketed as the budget-friendly option, and they are, relatively speaking, but even those have climbed noticeably. Factor in taxes, and the average total cost of a typical stay has jumped by roughly $150 compared to similar dates just 1 year earlier. Look across every resort tier, value, moderate, and deluxe, and the average nightly rate including tax now sits around $1,515, up roughly $152 from the previous year's average. That's an average across all categories, which tells you exactly how much the deluxe tier is pulling that number upward. A single night at the Grand Floridian, one of Disney World's flagship luxury resorts, has been listed starting around $819, and that's before park tickets, food, or a single Lightning Lane pass. What makes the hotel category especially frustrating for budget-conscious families is that staying off-site in one of the countless hotels lining International Drive or US 192 just outside Disney property doesn't actually solve the affordability problem the way it might. For a trip to most other cities, off-site hotels save money on the room itself, sure, but they eliminate the free parking and early park entry perks that come bundled with an on-site stay, and they add back in the exact daily parking fee that on-site guests get to skip. For a lot of families, the math ends up nearly a wash once you factor in the extra time, transportation costs, and lost perks, which quietly nudges a lot of budget-minded travelers back toward booking on Disney property anyway, even when the sticker price looks worse at first glance. The real receipt. Numbers on a pricing page are one thing. What families actually walk away having spent is another. Fox Business spoke with a family in 2022 that broke down their real trip total: $300 on Genie Plus passes for the whole visit, $950 on sit-down meals, and roughly $700 more on snacks and souvenirs. All told, the visit alone came to $8,480, and once airfare was factored in, the family's total vacation cost pushed past $10,000. The mother in that same report put it plainly: "I feel like Disney is pricing people out. Can the average working American family really afford this?" Her husband added a version of the same worry a lot of longtime fans have started voicing out loud, wondering whether a Disney World vacation has become something that's only for the wealthy or the upper middle class, before noting, "I think there's a lot of families that just simply can't afford to have that experience, and that's kind of sad." What made that particular family's comments resonate so widely when the story first circulated is that they weren't first-time visitors venting after a single disappointing trip. The mother specifically mentioned she'd been visiting Disney World since she was 6 years old, describing decades of personal history with the parks, before adding almost wistfully that she could see it wasn't the same Disney it was anymore. That's a genuinely different kind of criticism than a one-off complaint from a family priced out on their very first attempt. It's someone with an actual multi-decade baseline for comparison, watching the math quietly stop working the way it used to for people just like her. Independent analysis backs up their math rather than exaggerating it. A widely cited Go Banking Rates estimate put the baseline cost of a Disney World vacation for a family of 4 at $6,865 in 2024, staying at a value resort, which is already the cheapest on-site tier Disney offers. Other analysts have calculated lower figures, closer to $4,800 or $5,000 for families willing to travel during genuinely off-peak weeks and hunt down every available discount, which is technically true, but also requires a level of research, flexibility, and advanced planning that a lot of working families simply don't have the bandwidth for while juggling school schedules and limited vacation days. What's actually in your cart? It's not just tickets and hotels driving the total upward. Every category of spending inside the parks has crept up right alongside them. A Mickey-shaped ice cream bar, arguably the single most iconic Disney park snack there is, now costs $6.25. Character dining experiences, the kind where Cinderella or Mickey himself stops by your table, routinely run over $50 per person before tax and gratuity. Signature sit-down restaurants like Be Our Guest in Magic Kingdom carry price tags that would raise eyebrows at a nice restaurant back home, let alone inside a theme park. Quick service counters, the ones most families rely on for the majority of their meals since sit-down reservations require booking months in advance and considerably more time out of the day, have followed the same trajectory. A basic burger and fries combo at a Magic Kingdom quick service window now regularly runs $15 to $18 before a drink, and that's before anyone in the family decides they want a themed specialty item, a Dole Whip, a churro, or one of the elaborately decorated seasonal treats that show up on social media and practically demand to be purchased in person. For a family of 4 eating 3 meals a day across a week-long trip, even conservative quick-service choices add up to several $100s before a single sit-down reservation enters the picture. None of these individual price bumps look dramatic in isolation. A few extra dollars on a snack, a few extra dollars on dinner, a slightly higher nightly resort rate. But a family spending 4 or 5 days inside the parks ends up paying that markup dozens of times over, at every meal, every snack break, every souvenir shop they pass on the way to the next ride. It's death by 1,000 price tags, rather than any single shocking number, which makes the total considerably easier for a company to defend and considerably harder for a family to actually see coming until the credit card statement arrives. Disney's own dining plan, once considered a genuinely smart way for families to pre-budget their food costs, hasn't escaped the broader trend either. When it returned to the parks in 2026 after a pandemic-era pause, it came back noticeably more expensive than the version fans remembered. The quick-service dining plan, which includes a refillable resort mug, a snack credit, and 2 quick-service meal credits per person, per day, went up by roughly $1.33 for adults and $1.46 for kids. The standard Disney dining plan, which swaps one of those quick-service credits for a full table service meal, climbed by smaller but still real amounts on top of an already higher baseline price than it carried before. None of those individual increases sound like much on their own. Multiply them across a family of 4, eating 3 meals a day for a week, and the dining plan's supposed budgeting advantage starts to look a lot less like a discount and a lot more like Disney simply moving the same markup somewhere slightly less visible on the receipt. Disney already knows. Here's the part of this story that Disney itself doesn't dispute anymore. In early 2025, the Wall Street Journal published reporting revealing that Disney executives were privately worried the company had pushed its pricing too far, alienating exactly the middle-class families the parks were originally built to serve. That reporting didn't come from an outside watchdog or a disgruntled former employee. It came from inside conversations at the company, describing genuine internal alarm about affordability and its long-term effect on guest sentiment. The concern wasn't hypothetical. In Disney's fourth quarter earnings report for 2024, the company disclosed lower volumes attributable to declines in attendance at its U.S. theme parks, a fairly unusual admission for a division that had spent years posting steady growth. Guest intent to return scores, an internal metric tracking whether visitors plan to come back, had reportedly dropped as well. For a business built almost entirely on repeat visits and multi-generational loyalty, families who bring their kids to the same parks they visited as kids themselves, a meaningful dip in intent to return is exactly the kind of quiet warning sign that eventually shows up in a much bigger, much harder to reverse number. The Wall Street Journal's reporting specifically framed this as a two-sided problem for Disney. On one side, longtime fans and industry observers had already been complaining publicly about pricing for years, dismissed by some inside the company as background noise, from a vocal minority who'd complain no matter what. On the other side, this new reporting made clear the concern had moved well past outside critics and into Disney's own boardroom, with executives privately acknowledging that years of steady, incremental price increases had compounded into something considerably harder to walk back than any single decision had intended. It's one thing for outside consumer advocates to warn a company it's pricing out its base. It's another thing entirely when that exact warning starts showing up in a company's own internal metrics and earnings disclosures, which is precisely what happened here. Iger's answer wasn't what people wanted to hear. At Disney's annual shareholder meeting on March 20, 2025, CEO Bob Iger got the affordability question directly, and his answer didn't include any promise of relief. Iger pointed to strong demand as evidence the pricing was working as intended, noting that on a recent personal visit, he'd observed high crowd levels across the parks, resorts, and Disney Springs. He compared a Disney park visit favorably to other premium entertainment experiences, like concerts and major sporting events, arguing Disney still offered tremendous value by comparison. What Iger didn't offer was any indication that prices might come back down, or even hold steady. Instead, he redirected the conversation toward Disney's massive capital investment plans, roughly $30 billion earmarked for theme park expansion over the next decade as part of a broader $60 billion investment across the entire Parks and Experiences division, new attractions, expanded capacity, more immersive lands, all of it framed as justification for the cost, and none of it framed as a path toward the parks becoming more accessible to the families increasingly priced out of them. Iger did acknowledge, in an earlier comment, that some of the pricing strategy under his predecessor, Bob Chapek, had made Disney less accessible to some fans. He said that ticket prices went up again anyway, less than a year later. It's worth noting that Iger's framing wasn't entirely dismissive of the concern. He's spoken more than once about pricing being a constant consideration for him personally, language that suggests at least some internal awareness that the current trajectory can't continue indefinitely without real consequences. But acknowledging a problem exists and actually changing course on it are two very different things. And every concrete action Disney has taken since those comments, another ticket increase, another lightning lane price ceiling raised, another jump in parking, and annual pass costs, has moved in the opposite direction from what a genuinely worried company trying to win back middle-class trust would typically do. Talk about accessibility. Raise prices anyway. It's a pattern investors have gotten used to watching Disney repeat year after year, regardless of which executive happens to be delivering the reassuring quote at any given shareholder meeting. The deliberate strategy behind it. None of this is Disney accidentally losing control of its own pricing. It's a business decision, and a fairly transparent one once you look at the underlying logic. Disney's theme park division generates enormous profit, pulling in roughly $8 billion in the final months of 2024 alone. A strategy built around fewer visitors paying considerably more per person rather than more visitors paying less can produce the exact same revenue, or more, while reducing crowding, extending ride lifespan, and shifting the guest demographic toward wealthier travelers who are less price-sensitive and more likely to spend heavily once they're already inside the gates. That's the tension sitting underneath every quote from Iger about value and demand. Demand genuinely has remained high, at least among the guests who can still afford to show up. And Disney's quarterly numbers largely bear that out, even amid the attendance softness reported at the end of 2024. But strong demand from a shrinking, wealthier slice of the population isn't the same thing as a park still serving the broad middle-class audience it built its entire brand identity around for the better part of a century. A theme park that quietly redefines its target customer, from American families in general to American families who can absorb a five-figure vacation bill without much strain, is still technically thriving by the numbers on its own earnings report, even while a huge share of its original audience watches from the sidelines, priced out of a trip they used to take for granted. It's a strategy that looks entirely rational on a quarterly earnings call and considerably less rational when you're the parent explaining to a 6-year-old why this year's trip got pushed back yet again. There's also genuine competitive pressure shaping this calculus that Disney rarely mentions directly. Universal Orlando opened its long-awaited Epic Universe theme park in 2025, a multi-billion-dollar investment specifically designed to compete for the same family travel dollar Disney has dominated for decades. A new, genuinely impressive competitor entering the market gives Disney a real incentive to keep positioning itself as the premium option. Rather than trying to win a price war, it's arguably better positioned to lose than to win, given how much of its brand value depends on scarcity and exclusivity, rather than pure affordability. A positioning that only gets reinforced every time a rival opens something new and shiny down the road. The families getting squeezed hardest. The families feeling this most aren't destitute. They're not the families who were already priced out of any theme park vacation a decade ago. They're the ones sitting right in the middle, upper middle-class households with 2 working parents, decent but unremarkable household incomes, who used to consider a Disney trip an ambitious but achievable annual tradition. One Go Banking Rates analysis specifically framed this group, the upper middle class, as increasingly unable to afford core parts of the experience that used to feel standard: staying on site, eating at a handful of sit-down restaurants, buying the dining plan without a second thought. That's a genuinely different phenomenon than Disney simply being expensive, which it always has been to some degree. It's Disney's pricing outpacing wage growth badly enough that a demographic which comfortably absorbed the cost a decade ago now has to budget, sacrifice, or finance the trip on a credit card to make it work. One financial advisor quoted in that same Fox Business piece raised exactly that concern directly, warning that more and more families are putting this on credit cards to fund a vacation they can't actually afford outright, urging people to save ahead of time instead of financing a week at Magic Kingdom the same way they'd finance a car. That same advisor added a detail worth sitting with. Even as prices climb, plenty of middle-class and working-class blue-collar families are still going to find a way to make the trip happen because they want to give their kids that specific experience regardless of the financial strain involved. That's not a small point. Disney's pricing strategy doesn't just extract more money from families who can comfortably absorb it. It also pushes a meaningful number of families who genuinely can't afford it into debt anyway, because the emotional weight of a once-in-a-lifetime childhood memory carries real pull that a spreadsheet full of ticket prices doesn't fully capture. That's arguably the most uncomfortable part of this entire story. Disney's pricing model doesn't just risk losing the families who decide it's not worth it anymore. It also quietly profits from the families who decide it's worth it no matter what, even when they genuinely can't afford the bill they're about to sign up for. Where this leaves the family trip. None of this means Walt Disney World is empty or failing or in any real financial danger. The parks remain enormously profitable, genuinely popular, and for the families who can still comfortably afford them, still capable of delivering the kind of experience that justifies the price tag in their eyes. Attendance dipping slightly at the margins isn't the same thing as a business in crisis, and Disney's own billions in planned investment suggest a company confident enough in its long-term demand to keep building rather than pulling back. But something real has shifted for the audience this whole video has been about. The families who grew up treating a Disney trip as an achievable milestone rather than a luxury reserved for people who don't have to think twice about a five-figure vacation. A ticket that cost $3.50 in 1971 now costs more than $200 on the busiest days. A system that used to include ride reservations for free now charges nearly $500 a person for the premium version. A family that once budgeted a couple $1,000s for a week at the happiest place on earth now needs closer to $7,000 or $8,000 to do the same trip without constantly counting every extra charge. It's worth remembering that this shift happened gradually enough that most individual price increases barely registered as news on their own. A $5 ticket bump here, a $3 parking increase there, a lightning lane price ceiling nudged up by a few dollars during a quiet Tuesday announcement nobody outside dedicated fan blogs even noticed. None of it, in isolation, looks like the kind of decision that reshapes who gets to experience something. Stacked together across a decade, though, that's exactly what happened. One incremental price hike at a time, until a vacation built on the promise of being for everyone quietly became something closer to a luxury purchase for whoever can still comfortably afford it. Whether that's a smart long-term business strategy or a slow-motion mistake probably depends on how many of those priced-out families eventually stop coming back altogether. And Disney, by its own admission, is only just starting to find out. If you enjoyed this video, make sure to like it and subscribe for more videos just like this one. And let us know in the comments whether a Disney World trip is still in your family's budget these days.